Hello, and welcome to another episode of Letters from Camp. Today we are joined by Keith Sweeney. Keith, how are you today?
I'm doing very well.
All right. So we always like to start by getting people's story with camp. So, kind of finding out when you were a camper, what years you were on staff, what areas you worked in. Kind of. So, can you kind of take us through your Camp Wanocksett story?
Sure. Well, my Camp Wanocksett story actually begins at Camp Split Rock in Ashburnham, Massachusetts, where I first came into scouting in 1964. That was eons ago. But anyway, after a couple of years of being a camper at Camp Split Rock merged with Camp Wanocksett when Fitchburg Area Council then became Nashua Valley Council. And everyone migrated to Camp Wanocksett in New Hampshire. And that happened in 1965. I believe that was when the merger of the two councils took place. And I spent a year in provisional as a camper at Camp Wanocksett. And then our actual home troop from Ashburnham spent a week at Camp Wanocksett in the old, might still be there, Blackfoot area, which
Yep.
was the absolute furthest camping area up the trail you could go. And in 1968, I thought that was kind of fun to be at camp as a camper. I applied for a staff position and was hired by George Triquare, who was the then uh, scouting executive, as a camp bugler of all things. So I started my career at Camp Wanocksett staff in 1968 as a camp bugler. And they thought, well, we ought to give you something else to do too, other than playing bugle calls. So they had me work on the waterfront as a watercraft instructor, which was fine by me. So I taught canoeing, sailing, rowing, and I actually liked rowing the best. Although canoeing back then was the go-to area for most of the scouts, and sailing also. But the problem that we had back then in 1968 was there were 8 canoes, 8 aluminum canoes. There was one sailfish sailboat, and we had 10 god awful heavy wooden rowboats. Some of them leaked, most of them leaked, but that was my forte. I really enjoyed the rowing aspect of it. And after that year in 1968, uh, the following year, the programming had changed somewhat, and I had thought that I wanted to migrate to the nature scoutcraft area, but they kind of did away with that, and they brought in a thing called commissioner aides, and they made me a commissioner aide, which really was more of an elite type of setup for those who were commissioner aides, because you were expected, and we all did, know how to teach in all of the aspects of the camp experience, whether it was first aid, scout craft, uh, anything that needed to be taught. The commissioner aides did that. I did that for a couple of years, and after that, I was made an assistant commissioner and did that because I was in charge of all of the commissioner aides. And in 19 did that until 1973. And in 1973, I was asked if I wouldn't mind being the program director. And I thought, that's quite an honor. I think I'll be happy to do that. So I did that in 1973. Well, it just so happened that in 1973, on June 22nd, a Friday night, I got married. And the following day, June 23rd, was the first day of Camp Staff Week. So we spent our honeymoon at Camp Wanocksett in 1973. And 53 years later, we just celebrated our 53rd anniversary. So that kind of took me away from the camp experience after 1973 because life happened and I had obligations. I did become a district scout commissioner, but it was too much of a time constraint on and obligations in my life that I had to stay away from that for a bit. So that's what had happened. So I was a bugler for 4 years, worked watercraft, and also uh, commissioner aide. But one of the wonderful things about being a commissioner aide and having worked the watercraft area was that every week I would lead a canoeing expedition down the Connecticut River, and that was quite an experience. Some days, some weeks, the river was so high and so fast that you had all you could do to shoot the rapids and keep the canoe above above the water. Other times, the water was so low that you had to portage almost for miles. It was all fun, and I will say that the most miserable part was when it was pouring out when you were going down the river. But everyone survived, so that was my camping experience back then. I was also an Order of the Arrow Vice Chief in 1969, 1970, and became Lodge Chief in 1971. Also, the year that I got my vigil on, which is displayed in back of me. The sashes in back of me are signed by E. Erner Goodman. When on a day on the staff, we took a van trip with Eddie Weston to the Brotherhood Barn, E. Erna Goodman's Brotherhood Barn in Vermont, and I had everyone had given me the sashes for signing, and at that point I wasn't a vigil honor, but he had signed the vigil honor sash, so I ultimately attained the vigil honor recognition. And if you can see in back of me, I don't know if you can see my bugle back there, and that's the bugle that I played 54 years ago. Um, and that's my official Boy Scout bugle, and it did quite well. I not to blow my own horn, but I did pretty well. I was pretty good bugler, and that bugle's been silent for any number of years right now. But that's my scouting career at Camp Wanocksett.
So with the bugle, I imagine, that would get people up in the morning and, reveille at night. Would did it have other functions? Was it like transition to the next area type thing?
Um, no one ever called me. So the answer to that is there was reveille, there was mess call for the 3 meals, there was the color guard every evening for to the colors, and retreat every evening, and of course taps and church call, and never had to do fire call, but assembly. And yeah, so it was quite an experience, and it was enjoyable to me.
And the canoe trips you mentioned, was that something where like scouts would sign up and go, or would a whole troop go? Like how would that work?
Sometimes it was by signing, so you'd have different scouts from different troops. Sometimes a troop would request to go down as its own troop. So that's how that happened.
Very cool, very cool. So we met when you came back for the 100th anniversary, and you mentioned you hadn't really been back in about 50 years. So what was that experience like? What had kind of changed? What was the same? What was it like having kind of so long of a time gap in there?
It was different, I'll tell you that. And I went to the 100th anniversary. It's amazing. I live 13 miles away from Camp Wanocksett and hadn't been back to Camp Wanocksett for 50 years. And why? I don't know. Life happened because I just didn't have the time to go. But I'll say this. Every June, I would become so nostalgic for camp that it was heartbreaking to me. So when the 100th anniversary came around, I thought I have absolutely got to go back to the 100th anniversary. What a change! I will say that the things that had changed were, well, first of all, the administration building, the layout completely different. The old craft shop completely gone, and now there's a two-story building there. In the parking lot, there's a open storage roofed area for staging or whatever you're using it for. That used to be a cement slab of the old Thayer Lodge, and the most heartbreaking thing I think for me was going up to the nature den because I had spent 4 years living in the nature den. That was my lodging quarters. And when I went up to the nature den, the living quarters are now gone. It's a completely different feel to the building. There's no sleeping quarters there anymore. That one kind of made me a little bit sad. The other thing that I noticed was instead of the old two-holer hole in the ground with a funnel on the wall latrine system, there are state-of-the-art composting toilet buildings now. And I thought, wow, this is like plant, going out to a glorious place to go camping nowadays. So, and the other thing that I noticed was that the waterfront, talk about a resort compared to what it was in 1968, with so few amenities back then. I mean, there are paddle boards, there are kayaks, there are canoes, there are sailboats, there's motorboats, there's everything that you have there now. That's quite a bit of a change, I'll say that. So, and one of the best things that happened at the 100th was seeing some of the old timers, which I'm one now, like Ginny and Peggy Triquare. I know that's not their last name, but that was back then. And Freddie Burgoyne and Bob France, the old timers that were there when I was a new staff member were there at the 100th anniversary. So that was eye opening, and it was quite enjoyable to go back to the camp for that period of time.
Yeah, so you would have been there kind of during a time when there was kind of a building boom in the mid '60s, late '60s, kind of when they put a bunch of those cabins up and kind of changed layout of camp after kind of the merger, right?
I think that was after I had gone.
Okay.
There weren't really any new buildings when I was on the staff. I mean, we still had the green staff lodging at the end of in back of the flagpole on the parade field, and the staff lodging building at the waterfront was there. There wasn't really much building back when I was there. That took place after I had left.
Gotcha. So you spent your career as a lawyer. Were there any kind of lessons you learned at camp that kind of were helpful in that career?
Absolutely. Number one was be prepared. That would make a good motto, wouldn't it? So be prepared. That was something that transitioned from scouting to my law career. And also the other thing was public speaking. Having been a program director and an MC of all of the campfires and the Order of the Arrow, which we used to call them tap outs, and now that's changed. But public speaking is absolutely transitional from scouting, and it does transpose right into being an attorney, because now, or when I was practicing full time, I mean, speaking in court, speaking to juries, being a law professor and speaking to 100 students, and teaching, because I also did a lot of teaching for an international union. I would be sent all around the country to do teaching and law cases and different things. But public speaking came so easy after the scouting experience that I had at Camp Wanocksett. That really did helped. Everything that I did after scouting really helped in my career.
All right, so we'll move into our lightning round, which is the same set of questions we ask all our guests. So the first one is, what is your favorite camp song?
Actually, there are so many, but there were two that I really enjoyed. One was a song with no lyrics. It was an action song with a slap the knees, clap the hands, snap the fingers. Start with the snap the fingers, then the clap and the snap, then the knees and the clap. With la di da da, la di da da, dum dum dum. Well, after each verse, there would be the answer from the other side. La di da da, di da da, di da. And that was really enjoyable to me. The second one was called Flea Fly. I don't know if that's still one of the flee, flee, fly, flee, fly, flow, and that's an answer one too. Visca, kumbalati, visca, and the answer is back and forth. So those are two of the ones that I often sing to myself when I'm mowing the grass.
What was your favorite camp skit?
There's one that it was almost like a one act play, and it was called I Ain't Got the Money for the Mortgage on the Farm. And what that was someone would come out and there was an unscrupulous landlord who would try to collect the rent for the mortgage on the farm. And the mother said, I ain't got the money for the mortgage on the farm. Why, blah. And then the father would come in, what's the matter, Ma? Well, I ain't got the money for the mortgage on the farm. And they'd say, well, we ain't got the money for the mortgage on. Then the daughter would come in, then the son would come in, and multiple people would come in. Ultimately, the unscrupulous landlord met his demise, and he did. And then they didn't need the money for the mortgage on the farm, and everyone would walk off the stage at that point.
Gotcha.
That was kind of fun.
Yeah. I've never heard of that one. That's good.
I'll do it for you sometime.
Okay. What was your favorite meal at camp?
We had great chefs and cooks at Camp Wanocksett back then, and I wouldn't say there was any one particular meal that I enjoyed. However, there were three things that stand out in my mind that I really enjoyed, not necessarily meals. The first one was the bug juice. Now, the bug juice is kind of a Kool-Aid thing, and it was so cold and so refreshing and so wonderful. That was great. Another thing was trail mix. We would have to make trail mix out of peanuts and M&Ms and raisins for the troops who left the camp for a day so they could go out and either go to climb the mountain or some other activity. So we'd make the trail mix, and that was good stuff. I'll tell you that. I got my share. And then the third thing that I remember was corn on the cob nights. Well, the reason that was great is because, and here's a story, corn on the cob, the way that we would do it at Camp Wanocksett, they would take number 10 cans. And a number 10 can is one of those giant, like a giant coffee can, but it was made for camping because there was so much of it, like 30 ounces. And all of the butter that was boiled melted, would go into the number 10 can, and scouts would walk by, dip their corn cob in the can, walk off, salt it down, and eat it. That was wonderful. Every time we have corn on the cob here at my family, I say, back at Camp Wanocksett, they used to have, and my wife and daughter was like, I know, Dad, I know, number 10 cans filled with butter. So those are the three meals, the three meal or amendments to meals that I remember most about camp.
What was your favorite place in camp?
The chapel. The chapel was so calm and so peaceful, and there was so much solitude that I would go down to the chapel when no one was there and just be, because you can look out at the lake, you can see Sagey Island, you can see the happenings on the lake of people canoeing, boating, or whatever they were doing. But the chapel was my favorite spot.
Was there anyone who kind of mentored you as you were coming up, on staff, or anyone you kind of wanted to give a shout out to?
There are a couple people that I really give credit to for mentoring me on the staff, which also helped in my life. And they were both program directors. One was Dave Russo. He also happened to be my high school music teacher. It wasn't just with me at camp; it was with me all year round. But as the program director, he was meticulous, and he was very detail oriented. So I kind of picked that up from him. The other program director was Harris Tanner. He was also detail oriented, but he was an authoritarian, not necessarily in a meanish way, but you got things done when he asked you to do things, and I kind of modeled that a little bit in my life on Harris Tanner. Now, I mentioned being in the nature den and having lodging in the nature den. Well, there were a couple of people that I met in 1968, and one of them was John Mastrangelo, and the other one was Bob Moose Brown. And we spent years in the nature den. And those two guys became lifelong friends of mine. And they were so humble, so smart, so talented that I thought, I'm going to kind of model my life after you guys because I'm envious of some of the things that I'm seeing you fellas do. So that's the shout out. So that's who I would say.
Yeah. Both John and Bob have been on here, so people can search for their episodes and see what they had to say about those days as well. And Bob, unfortunately, did pass away in the spring. Um,
Yes, he did,
yep.
and we got together during the final years of his life,
Mm.
and he had told me that he had, hey, I wrote a song for Camp Wanocksett. I said, well, send me a copy. He said, well, I never wrote it down. There's no music. It's just something that I sing. So I said to him, Bob, if you would sing that to me, I'd appreciate it. So he sang it to me, and from that, I said, okay, I'm going to memorialize that. I'm going to write that down. So I composed the musical score based on Bob's tune and his lyrics, and that's one of the things that's in back of me. That's one of, and now it's memorialized, and I know that I brought that with me to the 100th anniversary for the Camp Wanocksett Museum, so it is now preserved as lore of part of the lore of Camp Wanocksett.
Mm-hmm.
And it was an honor for me and heartbreaking when Bob passed away because his family asked if I would speak at his memorial service, at his family only memorial service at the cemetery, which I did. And that hurt. And they gifted to me one of his very first campaign hats, which is right in back of me over here. And that was so thoughtful because I remember Bob wearing that in 1968 when we first met before he got his brand new Stetson campaign hat. But that was his very first one, and they gifted that to me, and that means everything to me at this point. So it's sad memories, but memories.
It definitely speaks to the bonds that get formed at camp, among friends. I think everyone who's worked at camp is still in touch with people they worked with, and has good friends who they worked with. It definitely speaks to that. Definitely.
Yeah. Well, if I can, I know we're wrapping up here, Mike, but if I can just leave with one thought,
Sure.
if I could, and that is, if you're at camp now, if you were at camp, everything you saw and everything that you did was creating a memory. And that memory is a lifelong memory. Now, I used to be a young staff member. And some people would say, yeah, you're talking about 1968. That's like 300 years ago. And I'm thinking, yeah, it is. It's about 300 years ago. But I carry with me and I treasure every memory that was made at Camp Wanocksett, because those memories have helped me and given me solace for my entire life. I know I'm old. I know I'm ancient. I know I used to be young and full of energy and anticipation. And now I'm old and full of lethargy and observation. But those memories have carried me forever. So the memories, the things that you're doing at camp or had done at camp, they're going to be memories that you will carry with you for your entire life. And Camp Wanocksett was one of the happiest times of my entire life. So things that you can't ever forget, don't want to forget, things that make you smile when you're reflective. And I will say that Camp Wanocksett was my very own. Camp Wanocksett was my scouting home.
Absolutely. And let's make sure it's not another 50 years before you come back.
Thank you, Mike. I'll be
and
up.
yeah.
You're only 13 miles away.
And actually, so this past Saturday, a gentleman came through, and his last time at camp had been 1959. So we found someone who beat your record.
Wonderful. I'm glad I'm still a young kid.
Yep, absolutely. Well, thank you, Keith, for joining me, and to all the viewers, make sure you like and subscribe and all of that. And thank you very much, Keith, for all the memories and your stories.
Wonderful. Thank you, Mike.